Right, greetings all, hope this finds you well as always. It's now time for the latest update from the machine shop, where we're up to and what we're on with. First up, we've got these spring, I don't want to call them, spring equalising beam bolts, we'll call them for want of a better word. Wonderful mouthful that. These are at the bogie of 44806. Now, these blanks were roughed out a while ago. There's 2 bolts and 2 nuts. Incidentally, the reason these are being replaced is not because there's anything wrong with the bits that were on 44806. The bits that are on 44806 are absolutely fine. Well, the only problem is they were on 44806, they're now on Eric. The reason they're on Eric is because Eric's bits failed during a weighing session. It was discovered the bolts had seized and couldn't be adjusted, and so 44806s were robbed. The engine was in bits at the time to keep Eric in traffic. And then Sean Bowler and his merry gang came along and they said, oh, let's get this all repaired, and then discovered we've got the bits. So 2 new of these had to be ploughed out. These were roughed out a while ago, actually, now I think about it, and recently they've surfaced the top of the heap, and so I've had Brian in this week and he started threading them, putting the finished screw thread on, and I'm sure you'll agree, ladies and gentlemen, that is an absolutely gorgeous screw thread he's put on there. Absolutely beautiful. EN16 machines absolutely beautifully with just a bit of Treflex. Get a beautiful screw thread, and Brian certainly excelled himself there. That's superb work. So next week he's got to put another equally beautiful thread onto that, and then he's also got to thread those to match. So that's his next little task. Another 806 job that's in is the last of the bogie axle boxes. That's set up on the borer, being aligned. This one's actually, we'll say, take 2. When I first machined it, I unfortunately didn't quite get it aligned properly on the table, and so when the time came to machine it, it didn't quite machine correctly. And so what we've had to do is it's had to go away. It's had to have the face that I made a whatsits of machining. That's had to be repulled with fresh white metal. And then we're now aligning it properly for another go. So you can see the clock gauge set up. So we're aligning, first of all, the previously machined face, and then I'm going to double check that alignment off the top faces of the axle box. The reason I don't start on the top face of the axle box first, that's the mistake I made last time, is that they ain't parallel. So what you've actually got to do is dial it in and then split the error on those. So if you dial one in and it's true, and you dial the other one in and it's 7 thou out, well, you dial them in so there's 3.5 thou run out either side. That was genuinely my muck-up. I will hold both my hands up to that one, and it won't happen again, honest boss. So there you go. So that's the last axle box to be machined. The other axle boxes are now outside, either fitted onto the axles or waiting fitted onto the axle in the case of one, and so we'll go and have a look at them next. Right, we've seen the last axle box on the borer for 806. Now these are the 2 that were done earlier, which have now been reassembled and put back onto the axle, ready to be refitted. What you've got here is a few other bits have been added. You've got this chunk here. This is a cover, we call it the mop shield. Inside this cover goes a strip of soft packing. The idea of that is it stops muck migrating from in between the frames into the journal of the axle box and causing problems. So the strip of soft packing is yet to be added in there. And then the other thing that's been refitted is the underkeep there. That's an oil reservoir. It also contains the pad which wicks oil up out of the bottom of the underkeep and then applies that oil to the journal. Remember, I said a long time ago, these things are actually riding on an oil film. There is one more axle box to be refitted to the axle over there. We've already seen its twin on the borer, and then once that's done, it can be reassembled. Right, now, the other thing we've looked at is we've seen those big spring hanger bolts Brian's made. Well, these work because you'll see in the top of the axle box here, there's this big dimple. Now, that dimple, we're just going to go and look at the bogie frame itself to see what happens next. So keep that dimple in your mind. Right, now, on the bogie frame here, you can see there's the horn guides, and then there's these big beams that run all the way along the bogie and sit on. Now, if you look underneath them, you will see there is a big, I don't want to call it, a convex protrusion. Now, that engages in the dimple that we saw earlier. And so the axle boxes bear directly onto those beams. Now, how do we in turn get this to work as a form of suspension? Right, if we look down here, we'll see there's this big plate here with a hole in it. That's part of the beams. Underneath it, you'll see there's this dirty great big leaf spring. Those spring hanger bolts that we saw earlier that Brian's making, they go between this spring and here. So this beam in turn acts on the spring then in turn acts on the bogie. That gives you suspension, and those bolts we saw, they give your adjustment, your equalisation, so you can even out the weights on each axle and also on each side. Okay, right. Apologies for the quality of the light here, because we're actually underneath 825 on the pit on 5 Road. But what we've got here is we've got the new spring hanger lock nut. I've just chased the thread out a bit on the Colchester because when this had been machined, we weren't absolutely sure of the dimensions, and so I erred on the side of caution. Well, that nut has now been chased out on the Colchester, and it's a nice smooth fit onto the thread of the spring hanger. So that job's done, finished, and ready to go. 825 all underneath here. 825, she's had a boiler test. She's run up and down the yard a couple of times. There's just a few last snagging jobs to do on all like this. And then she can go out the main line, well, on our line, do a bit of mileage accumulation. And when she's done that, she can go to Whitby. Okay? Right, another quick progress report, another little job. That is Barry's repair of this worm gear out of the cylinder boring equipment. Now, there isn't a vast amount of progress here, sadly. No disrespect intended to Mr. Neeson. He's been doing a smashing job. But unfortunately, he was going to make it out of this cast iron ring. The reason that's that size is basically because that's the billet we had in stock. Unfortunately, when he machined it and rough machined it and got it to size, he then realised that when it was put onto this, because his idea was he was going to reuse the hub of the old gear, when it was put onto there, if the gear profile had been cut, the inner wall of the, we'll call it a ring gear for want of a better word, a bit like you get on an engine flywheel, that inner wall would have been so thin as to be practically useless. And so this morning I've collected that green lump down there, which is a fresh billet of steel from Willesden's at Elvington, just outside of York. And so Barry's going to start from scratch and make completely new gear out of, I forgot what grade steel it is actually, but it's reasonably decent. And so it should last a bit longer, and it'll also go together properly, won't be a two-part assembly. No offence intended to Mr. Neeson at all in that sentence. It's just one of those things. The original idea was to do it with the materials we had. Unfortunately, it won't quite do. So we can do better with new material, so we've gone and got new material. So there you go. Just a quick progress report update on that. And the other job Barry's on with is he's well on with rebushing 44806's small motion. So as you can see, we've got an assortment of new pins, new one there, new valve crosshead pins, and then he's also started fitting new bushes here, and here, and here, and nice new shiny new thrust rings as well. And to give you some idea of the amount of work he's got done, there's the pile of discarded old bushes which can go in the scrap now. So this is just a steady away job, but the idea is once we get the wheel sets back under 44806, we won't be that far off wanting small motion. So Barry's just getting ahead of the curve and getting it done. So excellent job, Barry. Spot on, mate. So anyway, folks, that's it, I'm afraid. So if you found it interesting, educational, informative as always, or at least I hope you did, and all it's got left for me to say is take care, and I'll see you around.